April 6, 1862. As darkness closed in over the battlefield of Shiloh, the Union Army stood on the brink of disaster. The woods of southwestern Tennessee were thick with smoke, rain, and the cries of the wounded. From dawn until dusk, Confederate forces had crashed into unsuspecting Union camps with overwhelming force. Soldiers who had been cooking breakfast at sunrise were fighting for their lives minutes later. Entire regiments were shattered before they could even form proper lines. Horses screamed, cannon roared, the ground turned to mud mixed with blood. By evening, it seemed possible that the Union Army might not survive another day. At the center of this chaos stood Major General Ulysses S. Grant. He was not pacing wildly or shouting orders in panic. He stood quietly beneath a tree near Pittsburgh Landing, rain dripping from his hat, a cigar clenched between his teeth. Around him, thousands of exhausted men huddled in the darkness. Gunboats on the Tennessee River fired shells into the woods to discourage a Confederate night attack. The flashes briefly illuminated broken trees and scattered equipment. The day had been catastrophic. Confederate troops, led initially by General Albert Sidney Johnston, had launched a surprise assault at dawn near a small log church called Shilo. The Union lines were pushed back mile after mile. Confusion spread rapidly. Some soldiers fled all the way to the riverbank. Others formed desperate defensive stands in sunken roads and wooded thickets. By nightfall, nearly 10,000 Union soldiers had been killed, wounded, or captured. It was the bloodiest single day Americans had ever experienced. The scale of violence shocked even seasoned officers. Many believed the army had been outmaneuvered and outmatched. Retreat across the river seemed like a real possibility. Grant knew exactly how close they had come to collapse. He had arrived on the field after the fighting had already begun, having spent the previous night downriver due to an injured ankle. Throughout the day, he rode from position to position, steadying shaken units and reinforcing weak points. But even he could not stop the tide entirely.
As night fell, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman approached him. Sherman's own division had been battered nearly beyond recognition. The two men stood together in the rain, listening to distant musket fire and the groans of the wounded. "Well, Grant," Sherman reportedly said, "we've had the devil's own day, haven't we?" Grant did not hesitate. He did not speak of withdrawal. He did not mention defeat. He simply replied, "Yes, lick 'em tomorrow." Those 3 words were not shouted to the army. They were not part of an official address, but in that moment, they carried enormous weight. Armies do not break only because of casualties. They break when leaders show doubt. Soldiers look to commanders not just for orders, but for belief. If Grant had wavered, even slightly, fear might have spread uncontrollably through the ranks. Instead, he projected certainty. Reinforcements under Major General Don Carlos Buell were arriving during the night. Fresh troops crossed the river quietly in the darkness. Grant knew the army would be stronger in the morning than it had been at sunset. But numbers alone would not decide what happened next. Morale would. Throughout the night, Union soldiers endured cold rain and little sleep. Many expected another massive Confederate assault at dawn. Some officers privately feared the line would shatter if attacked again. Grant did not prepare to retreat. At first light on April 7, Union forces advanced. What had looked like near disaster the day before transformed into determined counterattack. Reinforcements strengthened weakened divisions. Confederate troops, exhausted and disorganized after the previous day's brutal fighting, began to give ground. By afternoon, the battlefield that had seemed lost was reclaimed. The Confederates withdrew, leaving behind thousands of casualties. Shiloh ended in Union victory. But victory did not erase the horror. Nearly 24,000 combined casualties between both sides shocked the nation. Northern newspapers erupted with criticism. Many accused Grant of being careless or unprepared. Some revived old rumors about his alleged drinking. Political enemies whispered that he should be removed from command. Grant understood the danger. His career had not always been stable. Years earlier, he had resigned from the U.S. Army under difficult circumstances. Civilian life had brought financial struggle and disappointment. The war had given him a second chance. Shiloh nearly took it away. There were discussions about sidelining him. For a brief period, he was placed second in command under Major General Henry Halleck when Halleck personally came west to supervise operations. The demotion was humiliating. Yet President Abraham Lincoln refused to discard him. When pressured to remove Grant, Lincoln reportedly said, "I can't spare this man, he fights." Lincoln recognized something crucial. Shiloh was not evidence of weakness, it was evidence of resolve. The Civil War was becoming a conflict of endurance. It would not be won through
careful maneuver alone. It would require commanders willing to absorb terrible losses and continue pressing forward. Grant's words that night at Shiloh revealed that quality. He did not deny the disaster of the first day. He acknowledged it plainly. Yes, it had been the devil's own day. But he followed that acknowledgement with commitment. Lick 'em tomorrow. That mindset would define the rest of the war. At Vicksburg in 1863, Grant would take bold risks to split the Confederacy along the Mississippi River. In 1864, as General-in-Chief of all Union armies, he would apply relentless pressure against Robert E. Lee in Virginia. His campaigns would be costly, but they would never retreat into paralysis. The rain-soaked night at Shiloh was a turning point not just in a battle, but in leadership. Grant faced the raw reality of modern war, massive casualties, confusion, and political backlash. He did not crumble under it. History often remembers dramatic speeches and grand ceremonies, but sometimes history turns on something far quieter. A decision made in the dark, a refusal to give in, a steady voice when others expect panic. On April 6, 1862, the Union Army stood dangerously close to collapse. Exhausted soldiers waited in fear of what dawn might bring. Their commander could have chosen withdrawal. He could have blamed surprise or circumstance. Instead, he chose to fight again. And because he did, the Union Army held the field at Shiloh. Sometimes, 3 simple words are enough to change the course of a war.